Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Pollack, and I will be discussing strategies that reflect best practice for the areas of phonemic awareness and decoding. In classrooms across the country, students who struggle with reading will typically have a weakness in phonemic awareness or decoding. According to the National Institute for Literacy, phonemic awareness is defined as the ability to notice, think about, and manipulate individual sounds within words, and falls under the larger umbrella of phonological awareness. Decoding is defined by Karen Tankersley as using visual, syntactic, or semantic cues to make meaning from words and sentences. The process of decoding that many students struggle with is quickly identifying a sound or pattern when looking at the written symbols. My case study student, Rebecca, struggles with decoding, encoding, vocabulary, and reading fluency. She currently receives instruction using the Orton-Gillingham methodology, daily practice with sight word recognition, and phonemic awareness drills focusing on additions, deletions, and substitutions. Rebecca still struggles with some aspects of rhyming as well. When Rebecca first arrived to our school as a 5th grader, she was basically classified as a non-reader. She did not know all of the letters in her alphabet, could not write them all, was unsure of many of the sounds and their symbol that they matched with, and she then began to receive instruction using the LIPS program, the Linda Mood phoneme sequencing program. During her individualized reading instruction, which follows a direct and systematic approach, Rebecca has built up word attack strategies where she recognizes word parts such as digraphs, the vowel consonant E pattern, nasal or welded sounds, and affixes to assist in decoding. In addition, breaking words into syllables through syllable division and scooping has proven to be successful for her. Additional phonemic awareness strategies that help develop reading skills, according to the National Institute for Literacy, include phoneme categorization, as using the odd one out strategy, and phoneme segmentation or blending. The Institute for Literacy also stresses that these types of drills not only help students read words, but that this instruction will help improve spelling and reading comprehension overall. Depending on the student, it is suggested that students only work with up to 2 types of manipulations, as research has found that students make more gains than when introduced to too many, and it allows for students to work towards mastery. For the phoneme categorization strategy, students will be given a list of words, up to 3, where they have to figure out which sound is different from the 3. These sounds can be changes with the medial sound, the initial sound, or the ending sound. For phoneme segmentation or phoneme blending, students will either be given the word and be asked to sound out or to identify each sound in the word, or will be given each sound in the word and then asked to blend them together and say the word itself. A strategy found in the Empower Reading program called peeling off proves useful for many students as it aids in breaking down larger multisyllable words into more manageable parts for the reader. Once a student is able to separate affixes from a base word or a root, then they will be able to derive meaning and resegment the word, making it easier to read. It was identified that being able to take off these beginnings and ends for students really helped them focus on just the part of the word that they knew. And then when they added on the prefix or the suffix, they are able to derive meaning. So looking at the word unswitched, they would be able to look at just the base word switch, recognize what the ed suffix would mean if they added switched instead of that, and then adding the prefix un, how that changes the meaning of the word. Using the same strategy is helpful when working with Latin and Greek roots. Students are able to just break down to the root itself, take off the parts before and after, and focus on what the meaning is, and then build it back up again. As students move from working with simple one-syllable words to multi-syllable words, it is easy to demonstrate how 2 one-syllable words can combine to make a 2-syllable word. Making flip cards that contain a flap for each part and then can be put together to form the compound word shows students how words can be broken apart. This strategy allows for tactile manipulation, which will help reinforce the new concept. Tankersley stresses the importance of having that visual representation for students to manipulate and have a tactile feel on. Using those multiple senses really helps drive the concept home and make students work towards remembering it that much closely. An extension of this would be using dominoes to build words. Each domino will have a one-syllable word, and students must build a domino chain to make compound words. This is a way to differentiate the same type of work and make the task a little bit tougher for students. Differentiated instruction and response to intervention are complementary to one another, according to Demirsky and Goddard. Tier 1 allows flexible grouping for students in order for students to be met where they're at in terms of instruction. Most times in Tier 1 in classes, you'll see word study groups taking place where students will have, teachers will have multiple stations for students to work at, and then they'll rotate. Students will have the opportunity to read with another student, either shared readings or choral reading, and then they'll be able to also work with a teacher at a station working on oral reading fluency. If students are pulled out, this is where they're getting just a little bit more additional instruction on top of their Tier 1 instruction. Typically, this will include strategies for decoding. A lot of times, these Tier 2 instructional groups will use decodable readers, which focus on specific skills that students are working on in the text. Lastly, Tier 3 is where my case study student Rebecca is. She receives tailored one-on-one instruction in this grouping. What's important to note is that she not only receives her Tier 1 in-class instruction, but she receives 2 pull-out blocks for Tier 3 with myself. So she's receiving 60 minutes of Tier 1 in class and then another 50 plus another 50 for Tier 3 with myself. Each of these strategies previously mentioned could be beneficial for students regardless of what tier they're in. Depending on their grouping is what will determine how much and how often these strategies are utilized. For example, the strategies mentioned before are ones that I'll use in my group with Rebecca. One such as like the chunking strategy or the pull apart strategy where she will have to take her base word and then pull apart her suffix or her prefix. It's also used in her Tier 1 class during her word work group. Okay, so differentiation for the strategies, it kind of depends on what you're looking at. But for phoneme categorization, what's really important to know is that students may have a much easier time recognizing an initial sound change than they would a medial or ending sound. It really depends on the student. But typically that middle sound is where students struggle, and when the word gets a little bit longer or a little bit more complex using blends or digraphs, students will have difficulty breaking apart those blends, so that could be where targeted strategy instruction is focused on depending on the student. In terms of working with syllables, some students like Rebecca benefit from looking at prefixes and suffixes to break the word apart, but for example, she also really benefits from being able to mark up the word underneath it using something like the VCCV pattern, using the VCCCV pattern, and really just using her pencil to mark up the word, break it apart into syllables, and kind of work with it that way. Depending on the student, they may need that further instruction and able to break the word apart, whereas some students may just need to take off the suffix and they will be fine. In terms of assessment, I've looked at a couple thinking of how important nonsense words are to students with decoding difficulties. Students, when they're able to demonstrate that they notice a letter and are able to match that sound to it, their nonsense words, when they're reading, will be much more fluent. They won't be trying to tap out the word sound by sound. So using a Dibbles assessment that has nonsense word fluency, when students are able to read the word as a whole word versus doing sound by sound, it's showing progress. The same thing, Dibbles is nice because the same thing is that it has progress monitoring and benchmark assessments. So throughout the year, you're able to compare and contrast and see progress where it's at. The weight assessment, which is the Wilson Assessment of Decoding and Encoding, has both nonsense word and real word decoding, as well as an encoding portion and a sight word portion. I love using this assessment in class. The only difficulty is that we typically only give it once a year, and then all of the formative assessments from lesson plans using the Orton-Gillingham program kind of show the progress that the students made up until they take the test again. The WADE does have the option where you can test halfway through the year using the different forms. So the WADE has a Form A and a Form B. So you could use the opposite form to see if there's progress made. In terms of assessment, though, I think it's important that students also have decodable readers. They're being tested on their oral reading fluency weekly just to see improvements and to be able to kind of still work through those. When they go from one syllable words to two, they need as much reading practice as possible. All the references are listed below, and thanks for joining.